Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats so that we can seamlessly move into the next discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, as we say in the Middle East, only God is perfect. And therefore, the Munich Security Conference is running a little bit late on time. And so therefore, but we are going to make a virtue out of this situation, because I think, ladies and gentlemen, you would all agree with me that the last session with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been a powerful reminder, and some of you would say a worrying reminder of why this next session has been entitled The Widening Gulf. It is more than just a widening gulf in the region, it is a widening chasm. With so many of you coming here, including the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, warning about the very real risk of another military confrontation in the Middle East. And everyone here, sitting here, will say, isn't there already a military confrontation in the Middle East? But can it get worse? A lot of it is crystallizing around Syria. We heard from the Israeli Prime Minister that Israel would not allow Iran to establish a permanent military presence in neighboring Syria. There are wars within wars, nearly 8 years on in Syria, whether it's Israel versus Iran and Hezbollah, Turkey versus the Kurds, Turkey versus or with tensions with the United States, another NATO ally, and of course the main conflict between the Syrian government and its allies against the rebels, backed by an array of Western and Arab partners. We have a very distinguished panel with us today, starting with Staffan de Mistura, who is the Syria UN envoy and who has described this moment in Syria as worrying and dangerous, as violent as any other moment he has seen in the last 4 years. Aleksey Pushkov is the chairman of the Commission on the Information and Media in the upper chamber of the Russian parliament. He also was someone who went to Syria early on in the conflict and met President Assad. Secretary of State John Kerry, back with the Munich Security Forum. Very good to have you here, Secretary Kerry. Ahmed Aboul-Gheit, another regular at the Munich Security Forum, the Secretary General of the Arab League. There's Riad Sarraf, who's the Defense Minister of Lebanon, a key player in this. And last but not least, our distinguished guest, the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu. There, I got it right. Only God is perfect. Before we begin, I want our panelists to know what you're thinking in the audience. Wolfgang Ingsteder warned there's a real risk of a war, another military confrontation in the Middle East. How many of you agree with him? How many of you disagree? We've got some optimists. John Kerry, let's begin with you. I think we cannot leave the thread of the last session. Very stark warnings from Prime Minister Netanyahu describing Iran as the greatest threat in the world. You worked very closely with Iran and on that nuclear deal, which now seems threatened. Your response?
Well, thank you, Lyse. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues. I'm going through withdrawal challenges here. Look, let me just share with everybody how important it is to think in big terms and honest terms about where we are in the world and where we're going. I think the Middle East right now is clearly one of the 2 most dangerous places in the world for a lot of different reasons, different cross currents. But I want to speak particularly to what the Prime Minister of Israel raised here, which is obviously the Iran agreement. I am a great friend of Israel. I had a 100% voting record over 28 years in the United States Senate, and I fully respect and accept the responsibility of the Prime Minister of Israel to defend his country and to take every step necessary to protect it in the long term. But I think that where we differ, and we became good friends in many, many, many hours of conversation, we have a difference of view. But today he said to you that in 10 years, Iran will be on its way to having a nuclear arsenal. That is just not accurate. It is fundamentally not accurate with respect to this agreement. So I want all of you, I want this Munich Security Conference and this moment to measure fully the reality of this agreement. I do believe Iran presents threats. We kept the missile components of the agreement. The Russians and Iranians and Chinese wanted 0 years of continued restraint on missiles. So we didn't concede anything. We actually won a victory of getting 8 years. We wanted 10. It would be wonderful to have a longer period, but we recognized that the agreement we were making was not to deal with all the other issues which we all honored and said are there: human rights, missiles, arms shipments, involvement with Hezbollah, Iraq, Yemen. These are all very legitimate issues. But what we decided, not as a concession, but as a matter of strategic thinking based on the Bush administration's experience for all of its prior years where they were seeking a no-enrichment policy, it went nowhere, it did nothing. Meanwhile, I ask every single one of you here to focus on where we were in September of 2013 when I became the first Secretary of State to sit down with an Iranian foreign minister in 35 to 40 years. I ask you also to think about this. If your house is on fire, are you going to refuse to put it out because you're concerned that it might light on fire again in 15 years? Or are you going to put it out and use the intervening time to do the best you can to prevent it from ever catching fire again? That is the way we approached this agreement. Why? I'll tell you why. The day I sat down with Foreign Minister Zarif in September in New York, that day, Iran had 12,000 kilograms of enriched uranium. That day, Iran was a couple of months away from commissioning the Iraq plutonium reactor, which would have produced enough plutonium, weapons grade, for 2 bombs a year. That day, they had 27,000 centrifuges deployed, 19,000 of which were spinning and enriching, and they were enriching at high percentages. That day, they were 2 months away from that commissioning, and our intelligence community and the intelligence communities of 5 other countries all said Iran is about 2 months away from breaking out to a full-on nuclear program. The day I sat down with him in September of 2013 for the first conversation in 40 years, Iran had already mastered the nuclear fuel cycle. And bombing was not about to put that genie back into the bottle. Now, I can't tell you how much we were resisting the Prime Minister himself, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, who said it to me personally, President Mubarak, who said it to me personally. The only thing you can do with Iran is bomb them. And I guarantee you, if this deal goes away, you know the pressures you're going to hear coming from certain quarters. Wow, we're right back where we were. You may have to bomb them because they're now free to go do what we have restricted them from doing. So what did we put in place? When Bush started his conversations with Iran, they had 164 centrifuges. That went up to the 27,000 I described, 19,000 of which were spinning. All right, where are we today? Today, we have 130 additional inspectors on the ground in Iran inspecting radio-transmitted sealed centrifuges and facilities on a daily basis. Today, they are limited to a 300-kilogram stockpile for 15 years, which is why when I hear nuclear arsenal in 10 years, it is physically impossible to make a bomb with 300 kilograms of enriched uranium, and we know every day that's what they're limited to. We also limited them to 3.67% enrichment. We limited them, and by the way, the notion that you can't inspect military facilities is just absolutely wrong. We have an inspection system in place where over 24 days, with a vote that would automatically put back in place all of the sanctions controlled by Germany, Great Britain, France, and the United States. 4-3, if that's the way it turned out. So my bottom line to all of you here, I know Lisa's pushing on here.
It's a very impassioned defense, and we appreciate your defense of a deal.
But
yes.
I just, the danger here is that if you move away, you put yourself into a stronger predicament that President Trump has created, because with all of his focus on the Iran nuclear agreement, Iran isn't going to trust anything that we do now on missiles or other things. They'll all believe it's trying to kill the deal. So how does an Iranian leader compromise with the United States given the position they've been put in and the problem with the hardliners in Iran? This is untenable. It is not good diplomacy. It's not sensible strategy. And I believe it is absolutely critical for Europe, for the world, to make sure we hold on to this agreement, because to go backwards, we know what the world looks out without the Iran nuclear agreement. It's not a better place.
Good. So our focus shifts from a very stark warning that Iran is the major threat in the region, including a deeply flawed deal, from Secretary Kerry, an impassioned defense of a deal that he believes, and other negotiators who are here, a deal which made the region safer. Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu, when you look at the region, where do you, John Kerry talked about where the danger is, where do you see the danger in the region now?
Thank you very much. First of all, I have to disagree your Turkey versus Kurds terminology. We are not against the Kurds in Turkey, we are not against the Kurds in Iran, in Iraq, and in Syria. We have 350,000 Syrian Kurds actually forced by YPG to leave, and none of them are able to go back. We are against PKK, we are against PJAK, we are against YPG, we are against Daesh, we are against Al-Qaeda, we are against Al-Nusra, all the terrorist organizations.
Your point is taken.
I have to. Well, exactly a year ago here in Munich, we were all together talking how to solve the Syrian problem and how to actually enhance the cessation of the hostilities, which we worked together with John Kerry and other colleagues for many years. John, by the way, we miss you a lot, and also Staffan de Mistura here. And since then, we have made progress on Syria. Still, there are serious problems. I'll tell you why. But we were not talking about Yemen much last year, but we have to acknowledge that the situation in Yemen is a disaster. And humanitarian disaster is there, so we have to pay more attention to Yemen. And Libya, quieter than last year, but still very fragile. And we have some hopes about the efforts of the United Nations, which we need to support. But Middle East, we were talking about the Middle East, but the US administration decision about Jerusalem fueled the tension in Middle East, in Israel and also Palestine. And this is also the issue that we need to work together. And additionally, for our region, we now have a Gulf crisis. 4 countries and Qatar. And this also actually why it is important. Stability of the region is important for our region, but it's also, this dispute is also affecting our efforts in even Syria. Now let's come back to Syria, that we pay more attention. As I said, we made a lot of progress. Thanks to Astana and Sochi, and we link Sochi to Geneva right now, and our joint efforts, we can say that the situation on the ground is much better, despite the violations of the regime in Idlib. Cessation of the hostilities, de-escalation zones, confidence-building measures, exchange of the prisoners, humanitarian access, and so on. At the same time, we have also made a lot of achievements in our fight against Daesh, which is good. But we cannot say that neither in Iraq or in Syria we defeated Daesh totally. We have to be very cautious here as well. But at the same time, we have been talking seriously or negotiating, meaning seriously, the political talks or political settlement, constitution, transition, and also election how to prepare the country for election. This is what we discuss in Sochi and Astana also now, but the main platform is the Geneva. We need to pay more attention there. But in our fight against terrorism, I can say that we are really determined. We don't have still the right strategy. We are 65 countries but in the coalition. But the countries who are not in the coalition, or the countries like they are having a serious problem between themselves, like Iran and US, also fighting Daesh together. It's common enemy. But choosing another terrorist organization to defeat another Daesh or other terrorist organization is a big mistake. It was the mistake of the previous administration and the current administration. John Kerry, my dear friend, we discussed this issue many times. And unfortunately, the previous administration continued the same mistake. It is not only about the threat towards Turkey. It is about the future of the country. Let me give you one example. Many, many years ago, the countries who supported Taliban in Afghanistan against Russia, for instance, or some other countries, now fighting all these terrorist organizations, Taliban, themselves in Afghanistan. But why did you support this terrorist organization against another country? I don't here legitimize what other countries did in Afghanistan. But supporting a terrorist organization against another terrorist organization is a big mistake and risking the future of the country if you care about the future of Syria. And also risking the territorial integrity. So we have to be very vigilant here. Now, YPG is, for instance, why did we support? Why did the United States support YPG? Why did the United States give that many weapons to YPG? To defeat Daesh. But we saw in Raqqa how they cooperated together, how they made the deals. And now, if you don't believe me, you look at the statements of the President of the World Aramean Congress. This is the Assyrians, Christians, saying that YPG is recruiting Christian children and forcing them to fight against Turkey. And now YPG released all Daesh elements. They are shoulder by shoulder against Turkish troops. And now they are confiscating all the properties of these people. This is the organization that our allies are supporting. This is outrageous and unacceptable. Therefore, we have to be very sincere how to defeat terrorist organizations. And we need to make sure that there is no violations. And we have to be sincere that we are supporting the territorial integrity of Syria. And we need to pay more attention to the political process, which is as important as fighting terrorist organizations. There are many actors in Syria right now. Russia is there, Iran is there, US is there, some other countries there. Now we are also in through our operations. But at the end, we shouldn't have different agendas for Syria. And this is what we are discussing with our partners. Here I have to recognize the role of Mistura, and I have to thank him. And recently we also reached some understanding with United States during the last visit of Rex Tillerson. I hope this time US delivers and US keeps its promises this time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for, you ended on the note reminding us of all the different foreign players with different agendas in Syria. Very, very hard to reconcile. But we should thank you for bringing in some positive notes that the political process, more or less, slowly, is moving forward, perhaps not as fast as people would like, and perhaps not even in the direction some people would like. But thank you for mentioning Astana and Sochi and the other events that have helped to at least give a sense that all is not lost. Is the glass half empty or half full, Your Excellency, the Defense Minister of Lebanon, Riad Sarraf, when you hear the account of your colleague from Turkey?
First, I need to thank you and thank to Mr. Netanyahu, who got us all late and effectively security measures for Mr. Netanyahu, who prevented us from even moving within here, is tremendous.
Yes.
I think he's better treated than Your Excellency, Mr. John Kerry.
A little bit, we'll put your microphone. We'd like to hear.
I was very delighted to hear what His Excellency Mr. Kerry said. For once, as a small country in the Middle East, I feel that they're shifting a bit and double standard is not of use now. this is honestly the first time I hear that US says Israel went too far. So this is all to your credit. The second thing, I need to state that whether we all agree or disagree, I agree with one item that was proposed by each one on this panel. And I disagree with others too. What we know for a fact, that thanks to Mr. Netanyahu, we froze our butts outside, and he reminded us what the meaning of refugee means, what it means to be outside your country for 70 years in the freezing death. The idea is to remind you what Secretary General Guterres said. We're not talking about Middle East. We're not talking about widening Gulf. We're talking about global Middle East. And global Middle East means everybody is involved. And means that there is no makeshift solution for Kurds or for Shia or for Palestinians. It is time, if you really believe that you want to make peace, it is time to sit and solve the whole issue. And the whole issue, in my book, starts with Palestine. Whether you declare it a capital or not, this is totally your internal affairs. But you cannot deny that 4 billion persons on earth today turn to Palestine and to Jerusalem saying, this is also my capital. And before we look at the whole image, I do not believe that makeshift solutions, temporary agreements, temporary arrangements, makeshift solutions, help this one against this one, help this one in Lebanon, be against him in China, help this faction in Syria, be against it in Iran or in Iraq. What is most important, and this is the message I'm sending to you, we in Lebanon are a small country, and I need to tell you what I heard in this conference. It's always the big country that voices concern about its security and its threat from a small appendix which is stuck in his side. It is time for the big countries to say, I am part of this and I am part of the solution.
Your Excellency, what I think some of us here in Munich has heard, that a war between Iran and Israel and Hezbollah is just a matter of time, sadly, but I'm sure you've heard it as well.
Let me tell you, $22 billion is what our southern neighbor spends on defense. $1.2 billion is what my country spends on its defense. For the past 15 years, we have not had one single aggression from Lebanon to the south. For the past 15 years, we have had 158 monthly aggressions from the south on Lebanon. Can you believe it that they actually bomb Syria from Lebanese airspace? And they say that they are threatened? So let me come back to the solution. What I can tell you is that Lebanon has 3 monotheistic confessions, religions, 18 separate confessions, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-phases, multi-plural, multi-partied, multi-alliances, multi-partnered sponsors. Yet, we managed to sit around a table with the help of many of you and say, let's put aside what is the basic disagreement and see what we can save. Is it time to save peace even if a regime stays? Is any regime of yours more important than 500 martyrs? Can you actually believe? So much. I will end it up. My only positive message is that do not force small countries into desperate measures. You are strong enough, you are financially well enough, and the right of law has to prevail on everybody. Let's sit together, solve everything. Solve the problem of Qatar, solve the problem of Syria, solve the problem of Cyprus, solve the problem of Saudi Arabia, solve the problem of the Gulf. And this is the only way for us to get anywhere. Because priorities go up and down. We put more power and more finance and more effort on one front, while the other front is burning.
Can you just respond, just because it is a question that may be hanging in people's minds at the moment. We've just had the Israeli Prime Minister holding up a piece of a drone, which he said was an Iranian drone that went into Israel. But with the warnings that this will not be tolerated, and Lebanon would be drawn in. Does this moment worry you?
I have 24/7 drone Israeli above my head for the past 15 years. Yet, let us be clear. Lebanon has no belligerent intent on anybody. We do not intend to aggress anybody. Yet, as Mr. Netanyahu warned, watch out, we will defend ourselves. We also have partners, we also have friends, we also have people who are willing to die for their country. We are for peace, yet we will not stand for any threat, and we will not accept any aggression, whether financial, whether military, whether drones.
Okay. I want to bring in Aboul-Gheit, who's listening to you very closely. He's the man who's going to have to convene the Arab states for another Arab League meeting if things do deteriorate. Where do you see, if you do see danger in this moment?
I see a very ugly situation in the Middle East, because I see the Israelis continuing policies of taking over Palestinian territory, and the Americans supporting them on Jerusalem, and no possibilities seen for an Israeli-Palestinian settlement soon. And on the contrary, the Israeli Prime Minister is talking about relations with the Arab countries that will not ever come unless the Israeli-Palestinian issue is settled. I see an ugly confrontation in Syria, and I see great powers competing amongst themselves, and regional powers intervening in Syrian affairs that would for sure lead to a non-settlement in Syria. A non-settlement in Syria. There will not be a settlement in Syria. And you know why? Because the Russians are on the coast, the Americans are inside Syria, the Iranians are all over the place, and I have to admit, I have been always trying to understand the Turkish behavior, the sources of conduct of Turkey. However, I appeal to my Turkish colleague and brother and friend, also take care that you are intervening in an Arab country south of your borders. So lay down certain principles prior to acting the way you are acting. So I see a very, very bad situation in the context of what everybody keeps saying, the result of the so-called Arab Spring. It isn't an Arab Spring, and it is not a counter-revolution. It is a disaster in play.
So no agreement in Syria, but Staffan de Mistura, well, you must sometimes feel that way too. John Kerry was looking like a man who's happy he doesn't have to resolve it this time. But what about the potential of the Arab League to try to resolve some of the rivalries within Arab states that are also part of the problem? We heard from His Excellency the Turkish Foreign Minister, everyone had to sit around at the table. Well, Qatar and Saudi Arabia won't sit around the same table. If the Arab countries themselves can't deal with this moment, there's no start that can be made.
Yes, there has been an Arab system. That Arab system has been working till 2011. After 2011, there has been an integration and disintegration of that Arab system. What we really need today, and I urge everybody to reflect on we need a regional system whereby the revival of the Arab system should be the core of arrangements that would embody everybody in the region. Turkey, Iran, the Arab League, and even the great powers that are interested in settling the issue. You see,
it's a great idea, but is it possible now?
It is possible if everybody would relinquish his own narrow interest in looking at the problems. The issue is, I have been listening to many people over the last 2 days. Daesh is no more the problem, and extremist groups are no more the problem. They have been demolished or defeated, and they are in the process of getting defeated. It is, and you have to recognize this, it is the environment that triggered and that established the Daesh. And that is directly related to the lack of a Palestinian settlement. Why is it so? Because there is real and deep anger in the region, a deep anger with the youth and with the populations. Why are we leaving the Palestinians the way they are? So settle the Palestinian question, change the culture, and then you will have a pacified Middle East, enabling the issue of regional arrangements.
Okay, let's very wise words, if only they were as easy to achieve, but well done for putting them out on the table. Aleksey Pushkov has been taking meticulous notes. Russia is now the main military power in the region. They have been hosting Astana, or being part of Astana, hosting Sochi. Arab leaders make regular trips now to Moscow to see President Putin. Where do you see a way forward, if there is a way forward, through this current crisis, which seems to be deepening?
This audience is mostly used that Russia disagrees. But today I would like for a change to agree with a number of things which were said there. First, I would like to strongly support what John Kerry said here. Basically what he said is the choice in Iran is between the agreement, the deal, and the war. That comes to that. I mean, if we took the extreme options, and there is a lobby for war against Iran. I remember a statement by the well-known US thinker, neoconservative thinker, Norman Podgoricz, who said that I wake up every morning and pray God, then we won't be Iran. And my question is, okay, you bomb Iran and then you do what? What happens next? The same thinking was behind the occupation of Iraq. We occupy Iraq and then we see. Then what did we see? We didn't see anything, to my mind, positive coming of that. And that's why I think that the Iranian issues requires first to act responsibly. That's a key thing. And I think that we are here facing a sort of crisis of responsibility in some countries when dealing with the Iranian issue. I would like also to agree with my friend Çavuşoğlu. I think there is progress in Syria. we are captivated by the negative developments, but let's see what happened in Syria in the last years. I would like to point 4 elements which, to my mind, point to a positive direction. Of course, taking into account all the complications still. First, there are more terrorists in Syria or less terrorists in Syria. There are less terrorists in Syria these days than there used to be, and that's a fact. Second, the situation of the population, we kind of forget about this. But on the territories that were liberated from Daesh and some other radical groups, the country is reviving. In Aleppo, they have swimming pools that have been opened, and people go to those swimming pools. I would like to remind you that before the war, I was in Damascus in February, March 2012. Damascus reminded more of a South European city than of a capital of a Middle East country. It was an open place with an open style of life. And then it was brought under the threat of the return of Middle Ages. And if you talk to the people who live in Aleppo, they will just tell you that it was exactly that. Now they are coming back to their senses. And it happens in a number of places in Syria. So I would like to not to forget about how people feel on those liberated territories. And I think it's a very important element of the situation. Third, now we have a diplomatic network that works over Syria, which was almost not present. Different countries were supporting different groups in Syria and not really interacting one with another. Then it started contacts between Mr. Lavrov and John Kerry, and slowly a diplomatic network started to be established over Syria, and it's very important. Now, we say that there might be a danger of a kind of confrontation between Israel and Iran on the Syrian territory and so on. Well, yes and no. I think that this diplomatic network can prevent things, because right after this Israeli attack on Syrian targets, Netanyahu spoke with Putin. There is a constant contact between Moscow and Ankara, between Ankara and Tehran, between Damascus and Moscow, between Washington and Tel Aviv. So there is a diplomatic network that works. And so I think that this is something which, if used efficiently, can prevent bigger confrontations. Of course, the situation is very complicated. There are a number of actors in Syria. But I don't think that we are doomed to new wars in Syria and over the Syrian territory. So, and finally, I want to say that we should measure the situation by, to my mind, one main criteria. There is less war in Syria or more war in Syria. There is less war in Syria. The conflicts which are going on are local. And what we should not probably forget is that all the countries which are taking part in the Syrian conflict, they should remember that we all agreed that Syria should be kept united. In Da Nang, in Vietnam, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump signed a statement on Syria. And they both agreed, Russia and the United States, that Syria should be a united state. So we should follow, I think, this line, and nobody disagrees with that. So I think that we have created some serious foundations for dealing with the Syrian issue. I don't think it will be quickly dealt with. There are a number of complications, as you see. But I think that there are now elements that contain the Syrian conflict. So I would be speaking today of the necessity of containment of numerous conflicts on the Syrian soil, and passing from the phase of containment to the phase of political and diplomatic solutions.
Thank you for that compte rendu. Before I turn to Staffan de Mistura, let me pick up on what Ahmed Aboul-Gheit said, which there will be no agreement in Syria. And Mr. de Mistura himself said in December that in a round of Vienna talks, a golden opportunity had been missed. And while blame was put on all sides, the greatest blame was put on the Syrian government, which did not wish to engage. Could you enlighten us briefly as to what kind of leverage you believe Russia has and is willing to use to try to move this process forward? Because I have to say, and I'm sure I'm not the only person who would say this here, that in discussions with senior players, they all end up saying the only way to move the political process forward is for Russia to use its influence on the Syrian government and President Assad. What's your reply to that?
Well, my reply to that is that Assad, whatever one thinks, is still the only legitimate political figure in Syria. Syria is still a member of the United Nations, and it is the Assad government which is represented there. There is no other Syria. There are groups that are putting this under question, but they are not at the stage of bringing down Mr. Assad. So Mr. Assad is a factor by himself. And this is something I think everybody understands, those who deal with the Syrian issue. He controls, well, there are different assessments, but he controls a big part of the territory of Syria. And he has an army.
Thanks to the help of his powerful friends.
You know, the groups that were contending his power were also acting with the help of some very powerful friends, and they were getting finance and armament and so on from their powerful friends. So I wouldn't say that Mr. Assad is in a unique position, but he has an army of 130,000 to 150,000 people that is a more or less efficient army, and it acts on the whole territory of Syria. So I wouldn't say that Mr. Assad can be easily influenced. That's the first thing. The second thing, I know that some people in the West say the most important thing that Assad goes. Well, I strongly disagree with that. First, if he goes, who comes in his place? Who comes in his place? He has some kind of legitimacy. Who is the person? Why he would have more legitimacy than Mr. Assad, who is largely supported by his population, by at least the population which is concentrated in the areas that are under the control of Damascus. And finally, I don't think that Mr. Assad today is a factor of destabilization in Syria. I think he is a factor of stabilization. What we had 2 years ago, in September 2015, we had Daesh and al-Nusra encircling Damascus. If they came to Damascus, it would have been much better. They came to Mosul, and they controlled the area for a number of years. Then what did the United States say? They said, no, we have to bring them out of Mosul. We have to destroy them. And I think that, finally, what would have happened, that Assad government would have brought down, an Islamist government would have established itself in Damascus, and at the end of 2-3 years, everybody would say, no, we have to deal with them, we have to get them out of Damascus because it's unacceptable. It would have been exactly the same story, first to creating a problem, and then to solve a problem. So I think Mr. Assad today is more of a solution of a problem than of a problem itself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pushkov. And I think underlining for all of us here that in this nearly 8-year conflict, that President Assad has continued to be, tragically for Syrians, the main issue between those who support him absolutely and say he is the only legitimate leader and those who oppose him and say that he is the problem and not the solution. To which this is something which keeps Staffan de Mistura up every night for the last 4 years. As someone who has stated that this, told the Security Council this week that you have never seen a moment as worrying as this, where do you find your quintessential hope in this particular quagmire?
3 points. First of all, let me make a little bit of a personal comment, if I may. I wanted to be a medical doctor. So my father convinced me, no, you speak too many languages, so why don't be a doctor of countries? So I would look at it from a medical point of view. And it's true, the patient is, when you compare to the time of the Aleppo battle, the Homs battle, and so on, and the number of people who died, and you have been recently there, you have seen it, is certainly in a different position. Should I be worried about the patient? I confirm what the Secretary General said and myself. Yes, I am very worried. Why? Well, never before have we seen in the last 4 years, actually major countries, we have them, you know them by name, militarily, personally, directly involved and engaged inside Syria or across Syria. Now, that can produce and has produced incidents, and that is worrisome. Of course, the good news because the doctor has to be also an optimist, and the situation is serious enough that we cannot afford to be a pessimist, actually, is that these big countries know that at this moment there is no proxy war. There is no alibi between them and what is happening. They are there, all of them, and they are very close to each other. So that's why I concur when we say that there were incidents. There are major movements of militarization and military activities, but these countries are responsible, and we hope will continue to be very responsible because the thing otherwise gets really out of control. Point number 2. The biggest danger in Syria at the moment, I will do also a little mapping here, is how many colors? Please, Liz, you see them closer.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yes. This is the X-ray of Syria today. Fragmentation. Fragmentation. And that is terribly dangerous, because if we go into living it as such and not maintaining the unity, the sovereignty of the country in a unified way, we may get into a balkanization or a chronic balkanization of what is a fragmentation. And I believe every country who is involved does not want that. So we should help it. Last point. So, are we really going to have a political solution? Well, again, the optimist will tell you there is no alternative. Let me just remind all of us, where were we when in Iraq? We thought, and I was there, we had found a formula. And then what happens? Guess what? The Al-Qaeda disappears and Daesh comes. And Mosul falls into the hand. And you know, all of us, how much we had to work, all of you, to actually avoid that. What is the answer? A political process. An inclusive political process. A new constitution. We are not talking about names here. We are talking about a new political constitution and elections under UN supervision, both presidential and parliamentary. That may avoid a new Daesh coming up, taking advantage of the fragmentation, and may give a chance for a political process to be the solution.
The UN wants to be involved, believes it must be involved, and you believe this absolutely. But mediators often say, for a mediator to succeed, there must be one mediator. And in Syria, there are many trying to mediate, trying to be the...
Right. True. As you know, someone some time ago said, how many divisions does the Pope have? So I do realize that the UN doesn't have a huge divisions or capacity in both military and financial. But we do have one thing, my friends, and you gave it to us, legitimacy, international legitimacy. That's why you wanted us in Sochi. That's why we go to Astana. And now let's look at some separation of jobs. Astana has been useful, as long as it focuses only on its task. And they've been delivering, and now they need to redeliver, by the way. The situation needs to be reassessed in Astana. De-escalation. And those countries that are in Astana have the capacity of contributing to the escalation. Sochi has delivered to the UN, and we have to recognize it, what we needed to have in Geneva, the Constitutional Committee to be established. At the end of the day, no one else can actually give that legitimacy. So we are bound to be heavily involved.
Okay, I want to open, we've had some very good interventions, some warnings, some wisdom, some optimistic notes. We have a good rule in the Munich Security Conference that the first question should go to a young person. So, sir, if you are under 25, I am very happy to give the first question to you. But you're very young looking, but I'm going to first give it. You will be second, sir. Reem Mumtaz is waiting with her question, and you, sir, will be next. You, sir, will be next. Just a little bit over 25. Please.
Thank you, Lyse. I have a twofold question, but very, very short. The first one is to Mr. Pushkov. You dispute that you, or Russia delivered a military victory to the regime over the rebels.
A little bit higher, a little bit, Reem, a little bit higher,
Yes.
sorry.
So, Mr. Pushkov, you dispute that Russia was able to deliver a military victory to the regime over the rebels, but that is kind of common knowledge now. How are you going to deliver peace to the people, the Syrian people, including rolling back the IRGC, which is considered by a lot of Syrian people as just as destructive as ISIS? And Mr. Kerry, we have 3 US allies right now involved in their own wars in Syria, 2 of whom are fighting each other, and Russia finds itself being the arbiter. How does it serve US interests for it to be so sidelined right now?
Okay. Mr. Pushkov, yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I didn't say that Russia did not play a major role in Syria on the battlefield. I didn't say that. I said that Assad has an efficient army that works and that can work on the ground, which is extremely important because you don't win wars from the air, and everybody knows that too. So Russia's role was instrumental, of course, to what happened in Syria and to reject the Daesh offensive towards Damascus. It was Russia that helped the Assad government to do so. So I don't negate Russia's role. It would be a strange thing to do. And I think it was a very right decision to go to Syria in September 2015. Now, how do we deliver peace? But we are today, and it's also of common knowledge, one of the key centers where efforts for peace are being taken and discussed. You know that the Sochi process is on the Russian territory, Astana on the territory of Kazakhstan, but it's a joint, I would say, diplomatic operation of Russia and Kazakhstan, of Vladimir Putin and Nazarbayev. We are part of the Geneva process. We try to bring together different groups of the Syrian opposition, and we have constant, regular meetings with those groups. So I think it's also of common knowledge that Russia today is doing a lot to bring back peace to Syria. And I think that it does not need really to have additional proofs.
We could discuss this at length, but I think it's the start of the question. Come to the, later you can continue it. Secretary Kerry.
Well, on its face, without any great argument, I think, from people who are serious about foreign policy, it not only doesn't serve the United States of America, it doesn't serve the region or the world for the United States to be sidelined. One of the great components, the art of diplomacy, is for any nation, but particularly a powerful and major player like the United States or Russia, to be able to compartmentalize certain issues at certain times. It's critical. We were able to do that. Sergei Lavrov and I, President Putin, sat down many times, and we were able to cooperate getting chemical weapons, the declared chemical weapons, out of Syria. We were able to cooperate on Paris, on the agreement. We were able to cooperate on the Iran nuclear agreement. In fact, Russia was extremely, Cathy Ashton's here. There were moments where Russia played a very significant role in helping us to advance that. And on Syria itself, we worked very closely. Sergei Lavrov and I chaired the International Syria Support Group. And with the help of Mevlüt Çavuşoğlu, with our other friends in the region, we got Iran and Saudi Arabia and all the other Gulf states and Egypt and Turkey sitting at the same table, and we all agreed on the political solution for Syria. And it's in Resolution 2254. We have it on the table. We have everything there. Everybody agreed. We want a unified, non-sectarian country that has the ability to choose its own president for the future in a legitimate election, run by, to the highest standards, the international community, and with a transitional governing effort that helped create peace on the ground while you move towards that effort. Now, I don't see the kind of effort, notwithstanding, I mean, Staffan has been heroic in trying to move this forward. But if the countries themselves are still playing proxy in one issue or another, it detracts completely from the ability to do that. Even as we obviously, it's very clear from the newspapers and from the indictments yesterday, we have a very deep difference with Russia over some of the things that we are convinced Russia is doing. But that doesn't prevent me from sitting here and saying, we're going to be helped if we resolve the full implementation of Minsk. We're going to be helped if we advance the bringing of the peace in Syria, where we all have a huge mutual interest, which we kept articulating, which is to defeat terrorism. One of the things I'm proudest of is we put together the coalition that went after Daesh. It was President Obama who made the tough decision, not tough, but the important decision, that we have to put our aircraft in the air, and we assembled a coalition, and for the first moment, the Arab states joined together, and we did that all together and initiated the resuscitation, if you will, of the opportunity for peace. Lavrov and I had an agreement coming out of Geneva that we would have the United States, had a veto over all Russian flights in the northern part of Syria over Aleppo in exchange for our mutuality in working to defeat terrorists, to defeat al-Qaeda, which was al-Nusra, and of course Daesh. And I regret to say that there was reluctance in some quarters on our side to actually cooperate with Russia in that regard. And it detracted from our ability to be able to implement. So bottom line, Lyse, is the roadmap for peace is there. We need to have real and artful diplomacy that is able to compartmentalize some of the issues but allows us to work together to implement a very clear process. Every nation at the table, including Iran and the others, agreed there's not a military solution. So where's the effort to implement the political solution at the level that many of us grew up with in the 1960s and 70s and 80s and 90s, when great nations and important nations came together and talked notwithstanding bitter differences?
It is
by the way,
rivalry and the competition.
Sure, I understand that, but rivalry and competition is unleashed by people who make decisions. And if leaders aren't leading in the right direction, if they don't have a larger vision for how you make peace and resolve the differences of the area, I mean, that brings you back to things like on the Iran deal. One last point on that, folks. There's no sunset to this deal. There's a sunset to a few provisions within it that Iran has to earn the right to be able to do by living up to the agreement. But there's a 25-year cradle-to-grave tracking of all uranium mined and milled and used in Iran. So for 25 years, there's a lifetime. For as long as Iran is a partner in this agreement and lives by the NPT and submits to the IAEA inspections, for the life of this agreement, you have Iran living by the enhanced additional protocol, which is the single most penetrating, intrusive inspection regime on the planet of any country that is using enrichment. So our intel communities, Russia, China, US, Germany, France, Britain, every one of those intel communities believe we will know what Iran is doing. And if, as Prime Minister Netanyahu legitimately worries that they might try to go break out again, we will know it by virtue of the tick up in enrichment. And if there's no explanation, we have every single military option available to us in the future that we have today. So I think this is all a matter of defining the issues, defining the leadership, and clearly we should have a much greater diplomatic initiative at this moment to help Staffan get people to Geneva and stop this insanity of destruction of Syria.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, there's 3 hands there. Is this the same question, or was it 3 people? Okay, the same. Then please, sir.
They're all the same part.
Yes, yes, okay.
My name is Nasser Al-Hariri. First, my name is Nasser Al-Hariri. I'm going to speak in Arabic, if you allow me. I'm Dr. Nasser Al-Hariri, the head of the Syria Negotiation Committee. I believe that what has been said has completely overlooked the main reason of what's taking place in Syria now. And that is the essence of the problems in the Middle East. I do appreciate, first of all, the efforts of the UN, and we are committed to the political solution based on Geneva I Declaration and UN Resolution 2254. But the regime of Assad had killed at least 500,000 Syrians. And if you looked at the statistics, you will see 95% of them were civilians. And they were 6 million people who have been internally displaced. And at least there are 5 million people, more than million refugees live in this kind country. Now, this regime that has used internationally prohibited weapons, including chemical weapons in eastern Ghouta, with impunity and with repetition, with the help of Russia, that defends the regime from this podium. In addition, this regime, we have militias that have a black ideology, where the Syrian people have paid a lot of their blood and precious efforts in fighting them, including the PYD that are also being supported by other people in order to take part of Syria. So if we look at the legitimacy, I think that Bashar al-Assad is the least legitimate personality in Syria. More than 50% of the Syrian area is entirely under the total control of Assad. And the people who are living in this area are living under the power of the gun. This regime has used all kinds of weapons, chemical weapons, and also it has failed in dealing with terrorism. If we're looking at terrorism as a separate phenomena from what the regime is doing, until this moment, this regime is refusing this political solution that we are all talking about here. Until this very moment, they are refusing to participate in any serious attempt to arrive at a peaceful settlement and a political settlement. The question about terrorism in Syria cannot be dealt with that regime being in control. This terrorism is not... I have a question. What is the position of Russia now, where the regime is refusing the political solution and refusing to participate in the constitutional committee, which was a result of the effort of the Syrians over the last period? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was an important intervention to give what is the very strong, as you heard, view of the Syrian political opposition, indeed the groups still fighting on the ground as well. It was a question for you, Aleksey.
Well, I will be very brief. The representatives of Damascus have been in Sochi. They're taking part in all negotiations. I know there are a number of groups that came to Sochi and then came back because they didn't want to meet people from Damascus. It was a bit strange to me. Why was the reason to come at all? And I know that there are groups which are orienting themselves to some Middle Eastern capitals that don't want to be completely part of this political process, as long as Damascus is part of it. Now, how realistic is this? What do these groups possess in Syria so that they occupy such a stand? Of course, you may be nihilistic, but I'm not here to defend the government in Damascus. But we have to put up with the realities. And the realities are such that Damascus is a necessary part of the negotiation. And it takes part in those negotiations. Along the lines of the United Nations, in the Astana process, in Sochi, they are always there. And we see a number of opposition groups that are not coming at all. So I can bring you, reverse your accusation in a way, and ask you why those groups are not taking part in this process. If those sides don't talk, where do we go? So I think that Damascus is more involved in the political process these days than some radical opposition groups.
Thank you very much. You're part of the same. You're part of the Syrian opposition delegation? No, he's not. A brief question. We have 6 minutes left, so I'll take a very brief question from you, and then Jan Eliasson, a very brief one from you, and then I'll move to this side. Yes.
Speak 20 minutes about the White House.
He's part of the delegate. He's part of the.
Oh no. It's Riad Saleh from the. Okay, sorry. You'll have to from the White Helmets. I'm afraid our time is very short, but very brief.
Okay, I am speaking Arabic.
The gentleman is going to speak in Arabic.
Riad Saleh, but unfortunately the session is coming to an end.
Yes, سأتحدث باختصار.
I came from Syria a few days ago, and I managed to escape from the bombing and bombardment that has targeted Khan Sheikhoun, and also one of the centers where the volunteers who work with the team of the White Helmets have been at. And the center was totally destroyed, and 3 people were dead, were killed. And when Mr. Kerry talked about that resolution about the chemical weapons and taking them out of Syria, let me say that we have been targeted 20 times by sarin gas, and as you know, the Khan Sheikhoun investigation showed that the sarin gas was used, and the chlorine was also used in eastern Ghouta as well as Sarraf in the last week. If we talk about Syria, we have to talk about the crisis of refugees today. Mr. Aboul-Gheit talked about that, or Mr. Ahmed talked about that, and talked about the intervention of Turkey in Syria. Yes, there is, but the Syrian people thank Turkey for their intervention, because at the moment they are hosting 3.5 Syrian refugees there, and they are also working to protect Syrians in the northern border area. Now, I want to ask you, what are your position about the use of veto 3 times within 24 hours about the use of chemical weapons?
So let's I just want to get a few more questions to think what the audience is thinking. Jan Eliasson, very briefly, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much. First of all, I agree with John Kerry. I think we have a serious diplomacy deficit in the world, and I think this panel and we all have a responsibility to build that up. I have a question to Chairman Pushkov. You gave a pretty rosy picture of the global network now around the Syria crisis. That could be helpful. But I think you are avoiding a very, very crucial basic problem, which certainly hasn't improved recently, and that is the relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We have seen that crisis and that lack of dialogue translated into practically every part of the Middle East. And my picture of the situation is not in that respect as rosy as yours. Also, I remember when I worked with Kofi Annan, Lakhdar Brahimi, now Staffan and Mistura on the Syria file, what we fought to preserve, and John, remember, was to make sure that we kept the formula from the 30th of June 2012 of the establishing the transitional governing body with full executive powers. You say that Assad is the only legitimate person representing Syria now, but I hope that you can here at this meeting also commit yourself to the fact that that formula still exists, that we have to establish a transitional governing body in the end, whatever the military constellations today show. Because if we lose that, then Syria will be in a very serious crisis for a very long time.
Thank you very much for putting that out. I think we'll agree that we'll take that as more of a statement than of the diplomatic deficit. And Sibylle in the front row.
To the Minister of Lebanon, I heard that when Hezbollah attacks Israel, you say that Lebanon didn't attack Israel. But when Israel attacks Hezbollah, you say that Israel attacks Lebanon. So you need to decide whether Hezbollah is Lebanon and Lebanon is Hezbollah and act accordingly. And the real question is, what about implementation of Resolution 1559 and 1701 of the Security Council of dismantling Hezbollah, including arms embargo on weapons coming to Hezbollah? And last question it's not about the Iranian deal, because the deal is on the nuclear program. And my question, why do you think, or do you think that the fact that there is a deal on the nuclear weapon means that the new standard of the world is that as long as you don't have a nuclear weapon, you can do whatever you want? And since the answer is no, why can't we deal with what Iran is doing now on the ground, supporting terror, without any connection to the nuclear deal?
Thank you very much. I'm looking at Ambassador Issenger, who tells me my time is up, but do we have a few more minutes to spare? 3. Gentlemen, you heard it from the... I think you can respond, and there's one other question for Mr. Pushkov about, I think we should, the chemical weapons is an important one. It is an issue of our time, and then
Could you translate her question in English, please? UN Resolution 1701 stated clearly that there is a cessation of hostilities, to which Lebanon has fully and is fully committed.
A little bit louder. Just bring up.
Lebanon is fully committed to Resolution 1701. And we have, under the UN auspices, stated a proper system of reporting all those aggressions. I don't think that an Israeli fleet of 4 jets bombing Syria from Lebanon has anything to do with UN resolution, with any sovereignty act. I call on UN to publish the reports on the transgressions of Israel and Lebanon when it comes to 1701. The issue is not to say Hezbollah or Lebanon or Hezbollah. The issue is to commit that no aggression will be done and no transgression will be done on 1701. And this is the major point where I call on for the international community and the Big Five to make sure that which party is committed and is implementing 1701 before we talk about threats and anything else.
Okay. I think this, we don't have much time to go through it, but it was important each side to. Mr. Çavuşoğlu, just a very brief comment from you. I think you wanted to reply to Mr. Aboul-Gheit.
Yes, I would like to actually reply his appeal. Mr. Secretary General, we are there to defeat a terrorist organization, and we are using our legitimate right. So to test self-defense, this is the right emanating from international law, UN Security Council resolutions, as well as Article 51 of UN Charter. This is for sure. You are talking about your system. I hope your system is strong enough to prevent the leader of one of your member states killing at minimum 500,000 people and prevent using of chemical weapons first. I hope your system dares to remind other countries in Syria not to stay. As far as I know, only Iran and Russia are invited. But the others are also as coalition there to defeat Daesh. Your problem is Daesh or with YPG. I hope also your system is strong enough to prevent some of your member states who are thrilled of United States to put pressure on Palestinians and also Jordan, who is the custodian of the status of Al-Quds, not to be vocal to defend the right of the Palestinians, also defend of the status of Al-Quds. This is your system, unfortunately.
very brief comment. Did you want to? Yeah.
Well, quickly to Tzippi's question. Tzippi, there's nothing to prevent us, and we should be dealing with all of those other issues with Iran. I have no question about that. But the problem is the waters have been muddied because of this credibility issue about America's willingness to live up to any deal under the president. So how do you make an agreement on missiles? What Iranian leader at this particular moment is going to be in a position to compromise with the United States or say the deal is going to be kept? This is the damage that has been done by this process. So if your real intent was in fact to have done missiles or done human rights or done weapons or done Iraq, all of which we should do, we've lost the sort of moral high ground and the capacity to be believed that that's really what we're trying to do. On Syria, if I just say very quickly, look, folks, Russia and Iran have made it very clear they're supporting Assad. And we saw what happened in Aleppo. We saw what's happened to the country as a whole. I happen to believe that Assad has created, I think that Assad has committed war crimes. I'm convinced of it. I don't have any doubt. And when on the chemical weapons, we weren't blind to the fact that there were undeclared weapons. In fact, we went to the United Nations, got a UN resolution that affirmed that there were undeclared weapons, and we had to try to get them out. That was the next step. But we took 1,300 tons of announced declared chemical weapons out, which if we hadn't succeeded in taking them out, I got news for you folks, Daesh would have had those weapons, and what would have happened in Paris, London, Beirut, whatever, could have been enormously different. So you have to look, I beg of you. I mean, I hate what's happened to people, but you've got 12 million people who've been made refugees. One of the things we got every country to agree on is that the diaspora can vote in the election. I'd rather have an election in which those 12 million people can vote. You tell me they're going to vote for Assad? You want to get rid of Assad? Get this election that is put together with the highest standards of international oversight, and that is the best shot together, hopefully, with Iran and Russia. And Iran believes Assad will win the election, so let's have it. Let's try to see if we can resolve this once and for all. But nobody's diminishing what Assad has done. But if it's as bad as you say, and the people of Syria have been displaced, and everybody knows who did it, it's hard for me to see those people voting for him.
John Kerry, thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we could continue this for a very long time. We began by asking about the widening gulf, the deepening chasm in the region. And I think what we saw in the last hour and 15 minutes is some small pinpoints of hope in processes, institutions, and even a nuclear agreement that John Kerry has so passionately defended, a multilateral agreement. But we also, ladies and gentlemen, saw the flashes of tension which coursed through Syria and beyond, which has left so many here, including Ambassador Issenger, so concerned about the fate of the region. I will give the last word to a young member of the Munich Young Leaders Forum, because it is a sobering question. It's from Mustaqim Walid, who is Somalian. He asks, is Syria a failed state in the original meaning of the word, and it is, you know, a description applied to Somalia, or is it on the brink? Failed state or on the brink? Such is the distress of Syria now and beyond. We are inventing new phrases to describe a new and more difficult, if not dangerous, situation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking all of our speakers, and please stay in your seats for the next session.